Welcome to our next installment of the topic of engineering ethics. So, remember that in the last class I had introduced you to the idea that um, each engineering discipline and the National Society of Professional Engineers provides you with a code of ethics that you are supposed to follow as an engineer. So these were the six code or six canons. For example, holding the safety, health, and welfare of the public as paramount, perform services only in areas of your competence, issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner, act as a faithful agent or trustee for your employer and client, avoid deceptive acts, and conduct yourselves with honor, responsibility, ethics, and legal aspects. Right? So you uphold the values of the profession. Okay, um, you know, underlying those canons are these overriding principles that you also are supposed to be aware of and utilize during your functioning as an engineer. For example, sustainable development. Treat everybody fairly. Do not discriminate based on any factors. Um, and then you will also respect proprietary information and IP, intellectual property of others, including charitable organizations, individuals, and professional societies. Yeah. So today we want to really address a way to tackle ethical dilemmas. Right? You will be faced with challenges. I had given you 3 examples in the last class. Today we're going to look at 2 of those and see how to break it down so that we can take the right decision. So the framework that would be useful to kind of follow and learn how to implement is this one shown right here, and it begins with trying to understand what is the dilemma that you are facing in the question that has been posed. Okay, so this once you clearly understand what this is, what the dilemma is, then you get all the facts of the situation. Once you have all the facts, you evaluate the various viewpoints that are very likely to occur. And once you've done that, and you make your decision and be able to justify your decision by providing a clear position, right? So these are the things that we are going to be able to do, and that you want to be able to do when you're faced with these situations that seem very challenging upfront. If you go through the stepwise process, it makes things a lot easier. So let's look at each of these aspects in a little bit more detail. So what is the ethical dilemma? Well, what you're trying to do here is you're trying to determine what type of ethical issue is arising from the situation you're in, right? And then you want to end up providing an answer or solution that takes into account everybody's viewpoints and is something that everybody can accept as being the most appropriate solution, right? So you're asking questions. How is this decision going to be damaging to someone or a group, right? Does this choice, that decision that I make, involve a choice between good and bad alternative, or maybe between good alternatives or between 2 bad alternatives? Is this going beyond the legal aspects, right? So these are questions you're starting to ask. When you want to get facts, you need to do research, right? You need to talk to people, you need to read up, and that is essential to being able to make an informed decision, right? You want to also make sure that the facts or any supporting information that you provide are actually supported by an interpretation by you that highlights that it might actually be conflicting viewpoints, right? Especially conflicting moral viewpoints. Right? So the more facts you use, the easier it is for you to interpret what viewpoint you are providing, right? To support your viewpoint essentially. So here are some of the questions you'll be asking. What are the facts? Do I know enough to make a decision? What are the groups that have a stake? Are some concerns more important than the others? So these are some things that you will be looking at. Now, when you're considering viewpoints, you're always trying to figure out good and the bad, right? The pros and cons of competing viewpoints. And using those considerations, you are then trying to identify what is the most compelling reason for the action that you have taken. And then once you've taken that action, you obviously have to be able to justify the course of action, right? So think about this, a question like what outcomes are desirable for a given situation and what will have the best consequence. So this is something called the consequentialist based view. What obligations do you have and what things should you not do? This is related to the duty as an engineer, right? And what would a virtuous person do? Virtue based view. And then finally, once you have evaluated everything, you are ready to make a decision and you act based on what is the most compelling viewpoint. You write down clearly what your position of action is, like you're writing down an argument that uses all the information and facts that you have so that you clearly reason out your position of action, right? And you should be ready to be criticized by people who will try to say that you have not made a correct argument or a decision, and that is where facts and carefully evaluating the various viewpoints comes into play. So you should be able to justify it. So this is a very important part. Especially the fact that you will be responding to maybe an individual or groups who are going to oppose your decision. Now, once you have, once everything is in place, you've taken a decision, you have to also be sure that you know how to implement it, take into account everybody's concerns, right? So remember, the action is going to affect people both in maybe a positive way and a negative way. So you need to be able to figure out how to do it in a way that that takes all these things into account. And then obviously it's always a learning experience. So once you are done with this, you learn, and then when you're faced with this issue the next time, you are in a better position to again solve a problem like this. So let's look at some actual cases and see how we can go about doing it. Okay. So what we're going to do is we will start by looking at two cases, and the plan is to really kind of reason out each case, and especially what we're going to do is we're going to see, okay, which code of engineering ethics will apply. So remember the 6 codes, right? And so we're going to look at that and see how those fit into the cases we have. And then we want to identify what is the actual conflict or conflicts that move us one way or the other, and then try and see how to make the best choice, right? And what this is really is it's about a discussion. It's about considering everybody's viewpoints and their interpretation of the case and how to implement the ethical codes, engineering codes of ethics into the situation, and ultimately making the best choice for all. So let's begin with this one here. I had introduced this in the last class, so take a moment and read through it. And the government is asking to verify the status of a nuclear reactor, especially in the context of whether it will leak toxic substances into the neighboring ocean. And you've done the study, and you find that it will leak within 8 years with a very good likelihood, but the uncertainty is great, right? And what that means is that although there's a big chance of a leak, you can't be sure to a very large degree. So you can't say for 100% with 100% certainty that it will leak, but you think that there's a good chance that it will leak, right? Then the nuclear reactor cannot be evaluated more carefully because it is still in operation, so it requires to be shut down immediately to really make a good assessment. And if it does leak, both the ocean and the neighboring community are at risk. So now the government receives your report, and officials say you need to modify your report so as to reflect that the nuclear facility is actually safe. And they claim that altering the report will protect public, it will prevent panic, and they can during that time they can actually go down, shut it down, and fix the facility. So the question is, what do you do? Well, the first step is to try and identify conflicts, right? What are they saying, and how does this map with your code of ethics, and what follows, what are the aspects of this case that fall that agree with the code of ethics and don't, right? So let's see, you pull up your code of ethics, you look through them, and you start seeing that the number one item here is to hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. And this is also public and the environment. Clearly you see that you have this already stated in the code of ethics. And then you see there's another one here: issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner. This also seems to be relevant to the case of interest, right? And so you can see now that what you're being told to do seems to take you away from this code as well as this code. Okay? So if you break down the conflicts, you'll see that the code of ethics requires you to safeguard the public's welfare and tell the truth when making public statements. And so now a question is, in order for you to resolve the conflict you're in, you have to correctly interpret and apply these two codes, and you have to then weigh your options and choose the one that is of priority, right? Okay. So let's just break down the codes, or rather the conflicts you have. So the first one is protecting the public. What does that mean? Well, what it means is you want to make sure that they are safe at all times to the best of the abilities, right? And if shutting down the nuclear reactor and temporarily disrupting power services isn't better option than waiting for it to leak out and damage the property and the lives and kill people around you and hurt people around the power supply, then clearly what you want to do is to shut down the power supply and repair it, right? So that's what you're weighing here. You're weighing shutting it down now versus a leak. And then the second conflict was issuing public statements in an objective and truthful manner. So this means that on one found that the nuclear reactor is not safe, but the government is telling you to basically say that it's okay for now, right? So what your responsibility is to tell the public clearly what you've learned. So provide them the facts. You don't have to make you don't have to try and embellish the facts with what you think might happen. You just give them the straight facts in a way that the public can understand, right? So you tell them there is a chance that it is going to leak in the next 8 years, and you try and give them as objective a statement as you can. So remember, all this is in the context that the government is trying to make you alter your report so as to protect the public. So in their viewpoint, they're better protecting the public by making you change your report, and that has led to these two conflicts, right? So when you break it down, you as an engineer are obligated to safeguard public safety and to tell the truth in your job, right? And so you cannot change the data that modifies the report to suit the convenience of your employers or the government, and you have to tell the truth. And so the conflict that you have come to is that it's between your role as an engineer and your obligations as an engineer versus your obligations as a citizen. And so the right choice is of course that uh, your duty as an engineer to tell the truth and to the public is basically going to overweigh your duty to be loyal to your employer, which is your government, right? And that's where it becomes really hard. You may have heard of cases where whistleblowers point out, things that are going wrong in a system, and there is a reason for that. The reason for that is that it's often very hard for somebody to come out in public and make these statements, because as you know, there are going to be a lot of repercussions against that individual or group, even though they are speaking the truth, right? So it's a very hard thing, and that's why the whistleblower option is in place, especially when you're working in the government, to make sure that you can get things like this out in the public domain. So here's case 2, protecting the safety of society, right? So here's the example that we went through last time. Again, pause the video and read through it. This is about your employer asking you to build a bridge for $1 billion, and this is after you've done a study and you show that it actually takes 1.5 billion to build the right bridge, and for $1 billion you will only be able to build a bridge that can survive that cannot even survive a moderate earthquake. And if you spend 1.25 billion, it can survive a moderate earthquake, but in an extreme but infrequent earthquake it will collapse. Okay. So your employer is telling you that you have to build it for $1 billion, otherwise you're going to lose your job, and so will a lot of the other people in the company. And so he asks you to go ahead with the next stage of the project. And again, you are here now and you're trying to figure out what you should do. Okay. So again, let's go through this and see what the conflicts are. Okay. So remember, one of the code of ethics requires that you take the safety of society as being paramount important. That's the one of the most important things, if not the number one thing that you need to do as an engineer. However, you are now conflicted because you also have a need to have a job, right? You don't want to lose your job, you don't want others to lose their job, and so you have a sense of loyalty to your company and your co-workers. Okay? So here's the conflict. The conflict is between your duty to society and your loyalty to your own career and the welfare of other employees. Okay? So again, you see, it's a very hard choice, right? But now, what is the more important thing? Well, welfare of society comes first, because that's what the code of ethics tells us to do, right? And so you have to take into account that your duty to protect the public is greater than your duty to your own career and that of your fellow employees. Again, an extremely hard choice, right? So that's why engineering ethics is so interesting and so hard, because we have such important choices come up in front of us, and hopefully when we have that situation come up, we are in a position to make the right choice, and in the long run, that's what will win out. Okay, so always remember that. And so to wrap up, you are all on your way to becoming extremely important contributors to society, and with that comes great responsibility, right? And so you will need to live and breathe an ethical approach to your daily activities, and the engineers have a code of ethics that underlies their decision making, and that helps you get through ethical dilemmas, so that you can make a decision that is based on facts. It takes everybody's viewpoints into account, and it is clearly outlined so that you can justify your action and explain it to the people involved. Right? And so this framework here, right, is a good one to be able to refer back to when you want to make an important decision. So with that, we wrap up our discussion about ethics. Look out for a fun ethics quiz, either through one of our online sessions or via Canvas. Thank you for listening.